Our church has very complicated services. Very complicated. We have many books. We have a book called the Menaion, which contains the material for each saint or feast celebrated on each date of the year. But we also have a book called the Octoikos, the book of the 8 tones. And this book has material for each day of the week, general material, and it cycles through this material one tone at a time. So one week is in one tone, the next week in the next tone, until we get to the 8 tones, then we start over again. And this general material is specific to each day. So every Sunday we celebrate the resurrection, always. Monday we always celebrate the bodiless powers of heaven, the angels. Tuesday we always celebrate the Holy Baptist, the prophet, forerunner of Christ. Wednesday and Friday we always celebrate the cross, always. These are days of absence, days of fasting for the sake of Christ's passion. Saturday we celebrate the departed and also all the saints. But on Thursday we celebrate the apostles. And this would be sensible, right? If we're going to set aside a day for the archangels and all the angels and for the Baptists and for the cross, we should also set aside a day for the apostles, right? Because they're very important. From them comes the scriptures, from them comes the church. Christ gave them the authority of the church. So that's very sensible. And yet, on Thursday, we don't celebrate only the apostles, but every Thursday we celebrate St. Nicholas. Every single one. We don't celebrate St. John Chrysostom every single day, although you might be able to say that we celebrate his liturgy almost every Sunday, so maybe we can say we commemorate him every Sunday. In a sense we do. But Sunday isn't dedicated to him. We don't have a day of the week dedicated to St. Basil the Great, or St. Gregory the Theologian, or St. Gregory Palamas, or any of these other massive fathers who are so important. And yet every single Thursday we celebrate the apostles and St. Nicholas. Why is this? I have to say, the church doesn't boast many saints like St. Nicholas. And St. Nicholas being placed with the apostles makes perfect sense to me because he lived the apostolic life perfectly. St. Nicholas was a man who was very pure in body and pure in heart. He lived a very righteous life. In fact, they say that when he was born, his mother took him to feed him, and she would breastfeed him, of course, and he would not take milk on Wednesdays or Fridays. He would not, because he was such an ascetic, and he was an ascetic from the time he was born. God had set him aside for special reasons, special purposes. And he lived his whole life in tremendous asceticism and in tremendous struggle. He was also pure in faith. St. Nicholas had the complete and pure apostolic faith, and he suffered for it. Most people think of Nicholas as this wonderful man who gives gifts to the poor. That is true. But he was also a confessor. He was sent to prison. Many people don't know this. He was the bishop in Myra and Lycia, and he was taken to prison before the time of Constantine, and he went to jail with his entire flock. He was in prison with them and shepherded them even in jail. So St. Nicholas was also a confessor. He kept the faith even with the threat of torture, the threat of prison. St. Nicholas was also a defender of the faith. Like the apostles, he defended the purity of Christianity, the purity of what it was. And when he met Arius at the Council of Nicaea, being one of the Holy Fathers called there, when he listened to Arius speak, it so inflamed his zeal, not passion, the zeal of passions, but he was so struck by Arius' blasphemy that he struck Arius in the face to silence his blasphemy, because his defense of orthodoxy was so intense. And when he did this, he was immediately to be defrocked. Because anytime a deacon, a priest, or a bishop lays his hand on someone violently, he is to be deposed on the spot. He's done. Because Christ never used violence, and neither can ministers of the church ever. So when Nicholas did this, they immediately took his omophorion off. They took away the gospel. They basically sent him away to be held somewhere until they could judge him, because this was the middle of the council. But that night, this vision came to all the bishops, and it was a vision of Christ handing him back the gospel, and the Mother of God handing him back his omophorion, saying, we actually approve of what he did. He didn't act out of passion. He did this because it was necessary. And he was reinstated. So St. Nicholas defended the faith to the fullest extent it could be defended. And he was a true bishop, a true shepherd, a true follower of the apostles. He was a man of charity. We don't need to even speak of this, as he saved 3 young women from prostitution and their father from damnation. Right? St. Nicholas has saved many people. His charity and his love of the poor cannot even be expressed. Just like the Apostle Paul, St. Nicholas loved the poor, and he did not ever wish to forget them, ever. Finally, St. Nicholas was like the apostles in that he was exalted with tremendous miracles, both during his life and after his death. And during his life, he worked innumerable miracles. And after his death, he's worked even more. In fact, we don't even know how many miracles he's worked. If I wanted to recount all the miracles that I even know of, my sermon would last 3 or 4 hours, right, for me to sit here and tell you everything that I know about St. Nicholas and the different miracles that he worked. And he's worked miracles even in our times, even in recent times. He is a great wonder worker. In fact, I read a story recently about him in which they said this was back in Russia in the very, very early times when Russia had just become Christian. And there was a man who lived in a town on the Dnieper River, and he wanted to go to Kiev to celebrate because that's where all the churches were. And his family was on this boat, this young family, and they were sailing down or up the river. And his wife was holding his new baby son, and the boat was hit by a wave, and the baby was tossed overboard. The mother dropped the baby right into this massive river. And of course, the boat kept sailing. The child was gone, drowned. And the father was lamenting. He was weeping, saying, "This is because of my sins." He's saying, "Oh, St. Nicholas, who am I going to teach about you? Who am I going to teach to honor you now that my son and my heir is gone?" He was weeping profusely, and he was praying, saying, "St. Nicholas, don't forget me, help me in some way." And he sailed on to the city of Kiev. Well, in the city of Kiev, there were many churches. St. Vladimir built many, and there was a great cathedral there. And in this cathedral, a warden happened to come into the church, and he heard an infant crying up in the choir loft. And this made him very angry because he liked order. So he went to the choirmaster and yelled at him, and he said, "What is going on here? What profligacy is happening that there's infants crying in the choir loft? Go fix this. Go figure it out." And the man, of course, went upstairs. And if you go to the old churches that are frescoed, the church in Montana and Butte is frescoed like this, where even the choir loft has frescoes in it. There was a big icon of St. Nicholas up in the choir loft. And as the choir master, or the attendant, or whoever it was, went up there, he saw this little baby lying in front of this icon of St. Nicholas. And he didn't know what to say about this. What is he supposed to say? So he went and told the warden went and told the bishop, saying, "This incident has happened, there's some baby lying in front of the icon of St. Nicholas, and we don't know how it got here because the church should have been locked. What does this mean?" And the bishop said, "Well, summon the people, and see if someone will claim this child." Well, the boatman, the man who had taken the boat to Kiev, arrived in Kiev with his family, his wife, I guess I should say. And he heard about this commotion in the cathedral, and of course, though he was grief-stricken, he went to the cathedral, and he saw this child, and of course, he recognized the child as his, but he didn't know what to think. He couldn't believe that it was his, so he left. And he told his wife about it. His wife, chastised him, and then she went and grabbed the child, and it was theirs. It was their child that St. Nicholas had taken out of the water and had placed in this church. St. Nicholas has worked many miracles. His miracles are always radical. There was a man in Greece in the old times, earlier than this other miracle, who honored St. Nicholas devoutly. And at one point he was a merchant and had to go to sea. And being at sea, he was aboard this ship, and he was thrown from the ship in a storm. And he was plunged into the very depths of the ocean, the abyss of the ocean. But having great faith in St. Nicholas, he said, "St. Nicholas, save me." And his faith was such, and St. Nicholas being so loving, that the next moment he was in his own living room in front of his fire. And his family was shocked because he had just left on this massive trip, and he was covered in water. Water was pouring from his hair and from his clothes. But here he was in his house. He had been delivered that quickly, that instantaneously. In fact, in Russia, during the revolution, many Russians had to leave to go to Manchuria, as part of China. And they had to stay there because of the Bolshevik Revolution. And many of them from Manchuria, they went to Shanghai. They went to places like Harbin, some of these cities. And I think this was in Harbin where the Russians had this big icon set up in the train station. And they had this icon of St. Nicholas, and they had these candles, this candle stand where Russians could light candles to St. Nicholas while they were traveling. This is what Russians are wont to do, what all good people should do. So one day these Russians are standing in the train station, waiting for the train to come, and all of a sudden this Chinese man, not a Russian, but this Chinese man, comes and does kowtows, prostrations to St. Nicholas, and then runs away. And the Russians are saying, "What does this mean?" And the man is covered in, he's sopping wet. It's the middle of winter. This is a very strange thing. So someone tracked him down, and they figured out what had happened. And this Chinese man was rather crazy. He was late to work, and in order to get to work, he had to cross a river, except he didn't have time to go to the bridge. So this man decided to jump from ice floe to ice floe to ice floe as he crossed this river. And he jumped to one ice floe, then he jumped to the next ice floe, but he landed on the ice floe such that he flipped it with him going under. He landed on the side of it, and it caused it to overturn, And then that ice floe locked with the other ones. So he was trapped under the ice in this river, icy river, and he was trapped under the ice. And for some reason, the Chinese man had the wisdom to say, "Old man from the train station, deliver me." Because he didn't know who St. Nicholas was. He didn't know any of this. But he saw these Russians praying to him. So St. Nicholas must have a lot of power. So he said, "Old man who is in the train station, save me." And the next moment, he said, "I was on the bank of the river. I was transported from the bottom of the river to the bank of it." So then I went back to the train station and thanked him because he saved me. St. Nicholas, brothers and sisters, has saved all kinds of people. He has worked miracles for many people. In fact, I can tell you, if it were not for St. Nicholas, you would have another man as your priest. I would not be your priest. Right? St. Nicholas has worked so many miracles, and I'm so joyful to celebrate his feast. And I would say that he is one of those saints for which everyone should have an icon, and everyone should light candles in front of his icon, and everyone should pray to him, because very few saints have the boldness that he has. Why he has this, I don't know, but he has more boldness than many saints, and what he asks for, God always gives. It seems always, because he has so much grace, he has so much blessing. I mean, even though St. John Chrysostom is our great teacher, yet I don't see him work as many miracles. St. Basil the Great is our great dogmatic father, and yet he doesn't work the miracles that St. Nicholas works. He does work miracles and works many, but not like St. Nicholas does. So we should reverence this man who is so holy, this man who was a carbon copy of the apostles and is worthy to share their day. May we have his blessing always, now and ever, to the ages of ages. Amen.